Who am I? The inquiry "Who am I?" is the principal means to the removal of all misery and the attainment of the supreme bliss. If you're living as who you think you are, if you're living as an embodiment of the psychological self, somewhere in there's the idea "I am not good enough, things don't work, or there's something wrong with me." Then those deep-rooted, primal negative thoughts will show up in everything. So you won't be good enough to have a loving relationship, you won't be good enough to have a happy life. It affects everything. So it's important that we really get the answer to this question, who am I? Very clear. Not just clear on the level of understanding, but clear on the level of experience. Then we really can just put down a lot of baggage, and what we can't put down presents itself, exposes itself naturally, in a beautiful process of self-realization. Self-realization is not about the psychological self, unraveling the knots of the psychological self. Self-realization is experiencing what's behind that, what's before that psychological self. This is the way that we turn from having psychological entanglements, to more and more having loving relationships. We could say that a loving relationship is when two people travel side by side through life together. They're individuals and there's a vibration between them, there's a beingness they share. In a psychological entanglement masquerading as a relationship, there can be multiple projections going on between the two people. For example, if your relationship with your father or your relationship with your mother has not been resolved and accepted and released, then chances are you will attract someone that will allow you to project that unresolvedness. So you start actually responding to that person almost as if it's your mother, or it's those qualities that you haven't resolved that are the basis of your relationship with your mother, and likewise with your father. Some people say that you can't expect to have a real loving relationship until you have completely resolved your relationship with your mother and your father, because until then you will be subtly projecting it onto all primal relationships. In extreme cases, onto all relationships. So it's very clear, in order to have a loving relationship that's clear and simple and full of love and grows and flows, you have to first be clear about who are you, what is the self, and secondly to be able to release and let go and resolve any issues you might have coming from your childhood with your parents. A psychological entanglement is not love. Love is different. A loving relationship is much more simple. It doesn't have this massive psychological content. You're not using the relationship to project out what you need to see of yourself onto the other or into the relationship. You're beyond that. It's just two beings that are together flowing with space between them, and this is an entirely different thing to the codependent psychological entanglement. To get over a psychological entanglement, which is what most relationships actually turn out to be, there has to be completion. You have to get what is going on, make conscious what was unconsciously driving you. But don't worry, this again is something that happens naturally and beautifully once we make a commitment to truth, a commitment to knowing the self, and then our path through life appears as a journey toward love. It becomes easier to love as you realize that's really what you are, and that the thing that was causing the complication was this false sense of self, this psychological self, this wounded self. If you're identifying as your wounded child, if you're identifying as being unloved, if you're identifying as being unlovable, which would have come out of some experience you had in your childhood, which you then gave the meaning to of not being lovable and not being wanted, then that will show up. You will attract people who don't want you. You will go for people who don't want you, who will abandon you. There are many different variations of this. I had that very same thing in my earlier life. I had it that I wasn't wanted, so I attracted someone who didn't want me, and something was satisfied in attracting someone that didn't want me, and the drama that ensued. It fulfilled a deeply held idea that I currently had about myself. Once it was exposed, it never happened again. What's amazing is that we can transform. There isn't a fixed way that we are. There is not any fixed way that we are. We like to think there is. People say you've got patterns and you've got wounds from your past, but who I am is not who the past says I am, nor am I the psychological self. In this moment, here now is the only place where life is real. Is there a wounded child, and can you call that child into this now? Do it, call it in, don't have it lurking in the shadows. But that construct can't stand in the light. It can't make it into the full now, this moment, it can't come. You have to dive out of this moment into the past in order to re-experience it. It can't come into this now, because it is only a memory, a construct. It will vanish. This is the principle of calling forth everything that you're running from, and face it. Call it forth, whatever you're fearful of, call it forward and watch it vanish.